A Georgia elections official is rebuking President Trump after a state election worker received a death threat. Republican voting system implementation manager Gabriel Sterling called on the president and the state's two GOP senators to condemn all threats.
It has to stop. Mr. President, you have not condemned these actions or this language. Senators, you have not condemned this language or these actions. This has to stop. Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. And you have the rights to go through the courts. What you don't have the ability to do, and you need to step up and say this, is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed.
President Trump has been attacking Republican officials in the state, including Governor Brian Kemp, whom he once campaigned for. Mr. Trump says Kemp allowed the state to be, quote, scammed, and urged him to call off the special election in January, which state law requires. The president is also pushing to re-verify signatures on absentee ballots from the November election. We should note those signatures were already verified during the initial vote count. So far, a second machine recount of votes requested by the Trump campaign has not shown any significant changes. Counties have until Wednesday to finish tabulating results. A Georgia Senate panel is scheduled to meet Thursday to review the integrity of the state's election. All this as grassroots groups launch major voter mobilization efforts ahead of the Senate runoffs. Republicans must win one of the two seats to keep control of the chamber next year. Democrats would have to win both in order to flip the majority. For more, let's bring in Latosha Brown in Atlanta. She is the co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. Latosha, welcome. Good to see you again. Before we get into the work your organization is doing, I'd like to hear your thoughts on President Trump's attacks on Governor Brian Kemp and the integrity of Georgia's election process.
You know, I think it's so disingenuous. You know, the fact that he is raising that there's issues around the election. Where was he in 2018? When we were talking about some of the irregularities around voter registration? The bottom line is he has point blank lost this election. Part of the reason why he's accusatory is because he himself will use any means necessary to cheat. And because he was not able to get his party to fall in line and cheat for him at the level at which he wanted them to do this election cycle, that is why he's now calling attacks. I think it is criminal for him to actually be able to make an environment where people's lives are threatened, whether they're Republican or Democrat. It is simply wrong. And so once again, I think that this is a dog whistle call that he makes. He had been very dangerous. And I think that the Republican Party is complicit. While now they are upset because they are now at the end of his attacks, he has been doing this all the while. And so in that, I think if there was real interest around integrity of the election, what about those 200,000 people who the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, dropped from the voting rolls, many of them being people of color and young folks, from being able to even participate in the election. So there's no sincere interest around election fraud in this. This is simply a political toy for him to rally his base, as he always does around using divisive measures and being accusatory.
Well, let's talk about the work that your group is doing. Yesterday, your organization, Black Voters Matter, received a $250,000 grant from the Southern Poverty Law Center for voter engagement efforts in Georgia. Tell us what your organization has been doing to galvanize voters ahead of the January 5th runoffs and how you're working around the pandemic.
So we have launched our Let's Do It Again campaign. We started last week, right before the Thanksgiving holidays. We were able to go around to 8 different communities and be able to connect with our people. We were able to give out food boxes to over 4,000 Georgia residents. And we were also able to do voter registration drives and to give people information on how to apply for their early absentee ballot. In that process, we're going to continue to do what we've done because we've shown results. That we're going to continue to go around and do in light of COVID-19, we're not doing door-to-door canvassing, but we are doing caravans. We're having caravans. We're working in 50 counties in the state of Georgia. We've been having caravans. We're working with over 45 grassroots organizations that have their own base of people. We also are working with tons of civic groups, sororities, and fraternities. One, to make sure this week is the last week for voter registration, which ends on Monday, to be able to participate in this election, but also to be able to educate people on the importance of the Senate race as it relates to Georgians. In addition to that, to be able to give people information around early voting, which opens up on December 14th. So we're launching a bus tour. We're continuing to do the things that we did in the general election, which is really be able to mobilize folks by giving them information, by caravanning, having visibility in the community, and making sure that people know that there's an important election that is coming up.
Well, we know that data released by Georgia's Board of Elections showed a significant amount of what's known as undervoting. Tens of thousands of people who voted in the presidential race did not vote in any of the down ballot races. Latosha, what do you think is the reason for that, and what are you trying to do about that?
Now, I think part of it is, if you look at the level of spending, that the hot ticket race this year was the presidential election. Often it is, but in this year, this was an extraordinary year. You know, we saw both presidential candidates in this presidential race. It broke numbers of more Americans voting than ever in the history of this country. And so that was a hot ticket race for a variety of reasons of how we find ourselves around national policy. I think what you see is when you get to the down ballot, a lot of those races are very locally centered. And you oftentimes don't see the same kind of resources that go into local races as you see in national races. The other thing is, I think a lot of people don't know those races, which is why, or don't know what, some of those positions, what they actually do. You know, which is why we're doing a lot of the work that we're doing is actually educating people, not just on the election, but the significance of the U.S. Senate race. That having a U.S. Senator, what can a U.S. Senator do for you? Like, how is it important? How do they push policy forward? And so I think that there's a misunderstanding around some of those races, and people really don't know who to vote for, or they don't know why it's important. And so that's why for us, we think it's really critical that in this election, that we not only tell people that there's an election coming up, being able to provide them information on access of voting, but also make sure that we're educating them on this election coming up. We're really excited because this Thursday, we're doing a town hall with Oprah. Right, that we're actually going to do Georgia on Our Mind town hall, where for an hour and a half, we will literally talk about the significance of this race, why it is important, and why people need to come out and vote again for this particular election.
And just to follow up, how are you connecting the significance of these races to issues that resonate with Black communities in particular?
You know, Georgia has been particularly hit hard with COVID-19. Many of the communities that we're working with, one of the communities that we work with in Southwest Georgia is Albany, Georgia, Daugherty County. That county at one point at the height of COVID-19 early on in the year, it had the third highest per capita of cases than anywhere in the world, right? And some of the workers that we work with, one of our organizers in that area has lost 7 first cousins to COVID-19. They were devastated in that small community, in that rural community. What's interesting is in the midst of a pandemic, there have been 2 rural hospitals that have closed in the state of Georgia. When we're looking at access to health care, when we're looking at the lack of leadership from the governor, you know, Georgia was one of the states that the governor not only never really fully wanted to close the state, but he was the first to jump out early and say, let's just open the state back up. We've seen a lack of leadership around COVID-19, and it has been devastating to our community, not just as it relates to health outcomes and the health impact, but also financially. When we look at the number of Black businesses that are closed, when we're looking at people who are underemployed or unemployed as a result, we need real leadership. This is an opportunity in the Senate race that we think one of the key issues will really be around healthcare access, and we need the Senate to take more action around that. The second thing is we also are talking about the economic burden that our community is bearing. That right now that we already were stretched, right? When we're looking at Black women, 68% of Black women are wage workers. And so they have been the most vulnerable in one of the most vulnerable groups as it relates to this the COVID-19. And so what we need a Senate that is actually going to look out for the interests of people, that's going to show and demonstrate some leadership around COVID-19, a stimulus package, healthcare in this country, and a criminal justice reform. Those are the things that our community, as we've been talking to them all around the state, those are the issues that our community is concerned about. and the economy. And so we need leadership, not just in the White House. We need leadership in Congress. And what we've seen from the Senate so far is, at best, they've been obstructionists.
All right. Well, Latosha Brown, Latosha, thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.